We are a fraternity of assassins, born to follow the code of fate. My father killed by it. My mother died for it. I'm hunted because of it.
Games based on movies have been around since the early 1980s, with infamous games like E.T. on the Atari 2600 and surprise standout games like Spider-Man 2, but there's also a section of games that fall in between not that bad but not that great. These are games that at best are worth a rental or a one and done. A game that falls into this category is the 2009 third-person shooter Wanted: Weapons of Fate, based on the movie from 2008, which is based on the comic released in 2003 by Mark Millar. Although the game received mixed reviews, it allowed players to use the film's gimmick of curving bullets and actually served as a sequel to the movie's events. Wanted is a movie that started a line of adaptations based on Millar's original work like Kick-Ass and Kingsman: The Secret Service. There were also a few video games released alongside the movies that gave fans a wider experience beyond the comics.
Who are you? I'm an asshole with a gun and a cool suit.
Wanted: Weapons of Fate was developed by Swedish studio Grin. It was one of their last games released before shutting down in 2009. In between developing a Bionic Commando reboot to the 1988 NES game and a tie-in game for Terminator Salvation, Grin was also working on a tie-in game for Wanted. While the movie is based on Millar's comic, it loosely adapted elements from the comic and created their own for the movie.
The big thing with the comic book is the fuck you attitude that he has.
The movie changed the premise of the comics world, where the superheroes have all fallen and been forgotten while the villains run the world. The movie dropped this for a guild of assassins, known as the Fraternity, who closely follow a code to take out targets presented to them by the Loom of Faith. Although not everything that the movie changed made sense, it did introduce the concept of curving bullets, which is not in the comic but made for great cinematic shots. This is the idea that Grin focused on for their game, a third-person cover shooter that featured the ability to curve bullets.
The video game is a very cool bridge between the movie and the comic. There's a lot of crossover, a lot of little cool details that hardcore fans will look at and I think be excited about.
Unlike other movie tie-ins that are prequels or retell the events of the movie, Wanted: Weapons of Fate acts as a sequel to the movie. It picks up merely hours after the movie's ending. It follows protagonist Wesley, who looks like Eminem in the comic and is played by James McAvoy in the movie.
You'll be given everything you need.
Curve the bullet.
To kill your target. I think he's ready.
Wesley is initially a pushover stuck at a job that he hates, but then discovers he's connected to a guild of assassins through his family. The game continues Wesley's story after finding out the truth about the fraternity and taking down his local branch. Throughout the game you play as Wesley in the present and his father in flashbacks, but both characters mostly play the same. As Wesley, you have a single pistol, but later gain access to dual automatic pistols that explode when curving bullets into enemies. The only other weapons are limited to obligatory turret and sniper segments, but in a game where you can curve bullets, these sections feel out of place in comparison to the better bullet time segments. While there isn't a lot of variety in weapons or enemies, the game does nail its curving bullets gimmick. Sure, there are other games like Max Payne 3 that also feature plenty of bullet time shootouts, but they don't hit the same way that a curving bullet does in Wanted. It's a fun mechanic and a great way to get enemies hidden behind cover. Using the technique in game requires you to fill an adrenaline meter that builds with each kill. Once full, you could use slow motion or bullet curve to quickly clear out areas in style with cinematic kill shots. Although there aren't too many memorable locations, there are some that stand out like the cubicle shootout and airplane assault, but other levels full of streets and alleys are forgettable. There's also a few bosses in between levels, but all of them hide behind cover until you take them out.
Enjoy watching me die.
Besides the 3 to 4 hour campaign, there isn't a lot of content. Unlockable characters and different modes like headshot only and close combat add another way to play, but it's all more of the same. In a game with a mechanic like curving bullets, it would have been great to see it more fleshed out, like having a challenge mode where you clear out areas, but Grin never got to expand on it.
That is what Wesley demands. Otherwise, shoot this motherfucker.
Looking back at games released in 2009, it wasn't the worst year for licensed video games. There was James Cameron's Avatar, Ghostbusters the video game, Transformers Revenge of the Fallen, and X-Men Origins Wolverine, which all received mixed to positive reception. Not too many broke the mold, but a few managed to strongly stand out.
Who the fuck are you?
Keep in mind, this was the same year that saw licensed games like Dragon Ball Evolution on the PSP. Wanted Weapons of Fate might not be a must-own, but it's worth a play, especially for a licensed video game, let alone one based on Millar's comics. As a follow-up to the movie, it's not as interesting unless you're really invested in the story, but as a game, it's a solid shooter. Although it did lack some of the action pieces from the movie, it took one of the standout parts from it and adapted it into a gameplay mechanic that's fun for a few hours. By the way, if you're interested in other video games based on comics, there's a Darkness series, which offers more variety and depth with their gameplay based on the Darkness power.
Face it, Jackie. You can't control the darkness, and you never could.
Over 10 years later, it's easy to look at Wanted and see an average movie tie-in game, but in an era where big-name games miss their mark, sometimes it's nice to play a short and simple game. As for the movie, there was talk of a sequel. Millar was working with the movie's producers on another film, but it stalled in development. Coincidentally, Grin, the game's developer, had intended to work on a sequel, but was cancelled after they shut down, leaving fans with no new game or movie sequel. Despite cancelled sequels, Wanted still remains one of the few franchises that allows fans to follow along in different ways. Whether it's a comic, movie, or video game, fans of Millar have many ways to enjoy Wanted, which can't be said for video game fans of Kick-Ass or Kingsman, but at least those movies got a sequel.